Let's start with Chelsea then, and Mauricio Pochettino, who told reporters after their defeat to Everton on Sunday that the club must consider spending in the January transfer window. Well, let's remind you of what he had to say.
After 5 months or the first half of the season, we need to check, and that is the reality. If we are not aggressive enough, maybe we need to, to do something, some movement. That is a thing to analyze with the sporting director, with the owner, and see what we can do to change this dynamic and to improve in the second part of the season.
So Mauricio Pochettino saying Chelsea need to sign more players. Really? Dan, really, do Chelsea need to spend more money?
It's just a case of when is enough now, isn't it? The last three or four windows, we've been focused a lot on Chelsea. I'm kind of at the point now where, with Chelsea, that I think they kind of just need to leave things as they are, let it marinate a bit. There's been such an upheaval of players coming in over these last few transfer windows, and we're at the point now where players they signed in a transfer window 12 months ago might not be Pochettino players, and he's talking about bringing in kind of his own players and players that are more in his mould. And I just think they've got a really, really big player. I know you're going to talk about the injuries, but a big player to come back in Nkunku, a player who's got the pedigree and he's proven at the highest level in terms of the Champions League. He had a good record in Europe last season. I felt like, for me, he was the most exciting of Chelsea's summer signings and the kind of player that you could build a team around, and him and Jackson had a nice little link-up in pre-season as well. I think if you're throwing another forward player into the mix, then I think it just becomes more chaos. And I think, like I said, let it marinate. Let Nkunku come back from injury. Let him come in and link up with Jackson. Just give players a little bit of time, because I just think if you're throwing more and more players at it...
Into the marinade.
They can't, into the pan. I don't know why it turned into a cooking show this morning.
Sprinkle of this, sprinkle of that.
Just leave it as it is, Chelsea. It's too much. Surely you as a Chelsea fan think it's too much now? Probably not.
To be fair, I think we'll go into it in a bit later, but I think there's more to it than just seeing the signings. Like, when you look at what he's asking for, you mentioned, having some of the players that he didn't necessarily sign, and obviously that happens with a lot of teams, but I think he's at a point now where he's been able to look at the team, look at the players that he wants in, look at the players that aren't available right now, and he wants to see, if there's anything that can be done in January. He didn't say that he's going to sign another 10 players. Yeah. He just said we might need to do something to add experience, to add the quality that he thinks he needs to, get up the table.
Dave, if they were to spend money in January, what positions would you say need strengthening? What would you add into the Chelsea marinade?
I haven't got anything left on the cooking, and let them cook. Let Chelsea cook. Sam mentioned experience there, but I think the forward or a striker is probably the position that they'll be looking at come January. We talked about it in the summer, though. Nicholas Jackson, when you're buying a player in that bracket, they're not going to be able to come in and be a 35 goal a season striker. When they were buying in that tier below, it was going to be so hard for him to come in. Chelsea fans, Chelsea supporters, they knew that Jackson wasn't the finished article just yet. And if you are going to go and buy an experienced striker, what have you got to spend? You've got to spend 80, 90, 100 million pounds if you're going to go out and get a Victor Osimhen. And then the question arises, well, is he going to want to come to Chelsea when they're in this kind of malaise once again? It's, we're getting on towards a year. The big names
aren't going to want to play at Chelsea right now. Well, look at Ivan Toney, for example. Does he want to go to Chelsea?
Ivan Toney is going to be one that we talk about in the January transfer window. I think simply because there would be a price that Brentford would be willing to do a deal at. But if you're Ivan Toney, if you're Victor Osimhen, are you going to want to go to Chelsea if there's no guarantee of European football next year? And when you get to the end of the season, if you are in the Champions League, that opens up a different market. If you're in the Europa League, it's a different market. But if Chelsea are finishing mid-table again, it's going to be difficult to attract that top level of player.
There's two things that really strike me with Chelsea. One is that, they spend £85 million on Mudryk, which is a hell of a lot of money. And you're saying, well, he's not the finished article, he's not ready yet. You're spending £85 million on a footballer, I think you should be ready. And how many windows now can they have to build this side? And I'm saying enough is enough, because, we're still talking about that they need a striker. How can you spend that much money, as much money as they've spent, and still need a striker? I was crunching some numbers earlier and I was looking at their attacking players. There's 142 Premier League goals between their attacking players, and 120 of them are Raheem Sterling. So it shows that they've spent all that money. They haven't actually got proven Premier League goal scorers, not got the finished article, and I just find that mad.
Right, Sam, you've been taking a look at why Chelsea may need to strengthen their squad in January. So what have you got for us? Show us, Sam.
Just going to make my way to the big screen. And you guys were mentioning it earlier in terms of the injuries. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons Pochettino wants to, make signings in January. Because when you look at the list that is going to appear in a few seconds, which is here, you can look at the experience that is on the list. You talk about Ben Chilwell. He's obviously vice-captain that went out quite early in the season as well. Romeo Lavia was a summer signing that excited a lot of Chelsea fans, excited the manager as well. Fofana's out for a long time with a long-term injury. But like Dan mentioned, Christopher Nkunku, who, you could see during pre-season was a player that, Pochettino wanted to have his team revolve around. He was a player that you could tell meant so much to the team, not just because of the quality, but because of the experience as well. And then when you look at the person that came in to replace him, Carney Chukwuemeka, who started the season really well, he then gets injured. So it's quite difficult. There's other names on here as well, the experienced Reece James, Robert Sanchez, Mark Cucurella, who recently got injured. But we're talking about a captain, we're talking about players, the most experienced goalkeeper, we're talking about experienced left back as well. So you can understand why he wants to add some players to the team. Maybe not in all of these positions, but it's definitely going to be difficult for them to, lose all of these players and not think to, invest in January. When you look at what they did in the summer, you can also see the type of players that came in. Caicedo, obviously £150 million. You saw the tug of war with Liverpool. Lavia, another one of those players. Christopher Nkunku, like I mentioned, as well. And it's been difficult for Poch because some of these players, yes, you could say that they're going to be added to what he wants to do for the team, but some of the players are not experienced. And, Nicholas Jackson, Ugochukwu, Washington don't have that much Premier League experience. So I think now he's probably going to have to look at players that he could maybe lose in January, maybe on loan or permanently, and seeing what players he can bring in. And some of these players I've thought of, and I think that these are the players that he could potentially, say goodbye to in January because they were linked with moves away in the summer. Trevor Chalobah was linked with Bayern Munich, was linked with a few teams in Italy as well. Ian Maatsen as well. He hasn't really been able to find his feet in the team. Noni Madueke, yes, he's got a contract till 2030, but at the same time, when you look at the minutes that he's played for Chelsea, yes, he's been injured a few times and he's been struggling to find his feet at the club. But when he plays for the England under-21s, he scores goals, he gets assists, and he might be one of those players that might be looking at the manager and saying, if I can't get minutes here, then can I get minutes elsewhere? It might not be a permanent deal, but a loan deal, especially. And Pochettino might be looking at these and saying, if we can get some, a good fee for some of these players, then maybe we can bring in the players that, can add the quality and the experience to the Chelsea side. But what do you guys think? Do you think that those players are the only players that could potentially leave in January, or is there anyone else?
The likes of Armando Broja, Conor Gallagher. Yeah. Dave, what do you think? Do you think it's essential that they do offload some players? They don't want a bloated squad and no European football either.
I think that's the point. They don't want to be left in a situation where they were last year, where it was so bloated, where it was meant that it was bad cohesion for the squad, ultimately bad for the accountants as well, because they've spent so much money and they had all these players on big money at the Cobham training ground. So I think from Chelsea's point of view, I think they would like to slim down a little bit still at this point. And if you're looking at players to offload, I think those are the prime targets. But if Chelsea decide to bring in another striker, then you have to look at the future of Armando Broja. And then Conor Gallagher as well, who we talked about a lot in the summer, because if he moves on, then that's as they say, pure profit for financial fair play. So that is an obvious upside. Yeah, it's an obvious upside. But he has played such a major part of Chelsea, and he's been one of their best players. Wearing the captain's armband
as well, and I was going to ask you about that, Dan, because Reece James, another hamstring injury, club captain, out again. Is the lack of leadership in the Chelsea squad a concern at the moment?
Well, according to Pochettino, it's leadership and height and physicality that seem to be the things that are missing from Chelsea at the moment. I really, really feel for Reece James because he's such a good player, and when he's on his game, you've got Chilwell on the other side on his game as well. Chelsea become infinitely a better side when those two are on form, but Reece James just cannot catch a break with his fitness at all. He took on that leadership role in the summer, and it sounds like he was a real positive influence in the dressing room and across Chelsea in the summer, but he's such a good footballer as well, so they're they're missing his leadership and him setting an example on the pitch, but they're missing his ability as a footballer as well, because England have got so many right backs to choose from, but he probably provides the best of everything that those right backs have to offer. He's such a high level player, and for him to just keep coming back, then getting injured again, and it being stop-start. Gusto's been injured as well, so the injuries will obviously cause Chelsea problems, and they're probably only really being able to lean on Thiago Silva, who's the only player in there of any real experience, which again says to me they've spent all that money and they've still got problems in front of goal, but there's also that leadership void as well. You know, is everything they've done good business? Yeah,
I feel like you said, I feel sorry for Reece James, because you can tell he wants to take on that pressure of being the captain and being the main man. And you know, at the start of the season, he was saying he was trying to galvanise the team and say we're going to go for what we need to this season. And he's just been unfortunate. But when you look at other players, Chilwell, another captain in the side, getting injured, I feel like they've been so unfortunate, because you can see what Poch was building in the summer with the experienced players, and almost he knew that they were younger players, but he wanted to build them around the players that have more experience in the Premier League. And it's just been difficult. Like I said, like we saw, they haven't had a time in the season where they haven't had at least 8 players injured in the Premier League. And it's not really spoke about that much, because everyone thinks that Chelsea have this bloated squad. But realistically, when you're trying to build that consistency, you're trying to build a team, missing your bigger players like that, it's going to be difficult for any side. So I can understand why Pochettino wants to go into the market and maybe get those experienced players, because it's been really difficult trying to embed the youngsters that, you know, don't have that Premier League experience.
Well, speaking of Pochettino's project, we know Chelsea signed players on lengthy deals last summer and in January as well. But this week, Premier League clubs have voted for a 5-year limit to pay transfer fees. Right, Dave, can you explain this a bit? What does it mean, and what kind of impact is it going to have on Chelsea?
So Chelsea were one of the clubs and the prime example, really, of a Premier League side utilising the loophole, essentially, in the rules, where they could sign players like Enzo Fernandez and Mykhailo Mudryk
8.5-year deals.
On 8.5-year contracts, and the amortisation on that, so the yearly instalments they would pay for those players to the selling club would be spread out over the length of the contract. So instead of, say, paying off the player over 5 years, they'd be extending that, and therefore it'd work out cheaper over the year, and that would obviously help financial fair play. So Premier League clubs this week have voted to essentially close that loophole. Now, clubs can still offer players longer contracts than 5 years, but the transfer fee to the selling club has to be paid off over those 5 years. Now, the way it's going to work for Chelsea is those rules haven't been backdated, so it's not going to affect Fernandes, it's not going to affect Mudryk. So good news for Chelsea on that front. But now you won't necessarily be seeing huge contracts or other clubs copying what Chelsea did, because that loophole is now closed.